Hey guys, welcome again to another Sacred Writings video. My name is Jason Damiani, and today I'm going to be going over one of the oldest Bible fragments in my collection. So the manuscript that I have in my collection is dated from the late 11th century to the first half of the 12th century, which brings this manuscript to right around 1,000 years old. Definitely more in that 900 range, but it is pushing that 1,000 years old, which is really, really amazing. This fragment here is fairly large in the sense that it's very wide, although it's not as long because it's not a full Bible leaf. As I mentioned, it's just a fragment of one. Now, the passage that this fragment has is from the Gospel of John in chapter 6. Now, I do have to be really careful and slow with this fragment because it's so old. It's very fragile. As you can see, it is not a complete piece, which does bring a lot more fragile aspects to it. But as I mentioned, this leaf does contain the Gospel of John, chapter 6, and specifically John 6:5, where Jesus feeds the 5,000. Now, John 6:5 reads, "Lifting up his eyes, then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, 'Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?'" Now, this passage is a really important and integral passage in the earthly ministry of Christ, in that he feeds the 5,000, which would probably actually be closer to 20,000 people because they didn't count women, they didn't count children, and so if you were just to do simple arithmetic, that put it closer to 20,000 people. So it really is an amazing miracle that's going on there and a true testament to Christ's power, since of course he is God incarnate. So an amazing passage. Again, as I always recommend, go and read that chapter for yourself. Check out John. The whole Gospel of John is amazing. All of the Bible's amazing. That's why I collect it. But John chapter 6 is an awesome and important chapter, one that I would highly encourage you to check out. Now, as far as any significance to this leaf or anything that's going on as far as historical that we know about this, what I can say to start out with is that this fragment is extremely rare since it dates back to the 11th century. And this is technically from a large Latin gospel lectionary. A lectionary is a liturgical book which, in contrast to usual gospel books containing the full text of the gospel, comprises only those parts of the gospels that are used for the liturgical readings during the ecclesiastical year, presented in chronological order. So what this manuscript was from a lectionary which contains the Gospel of John, chapter 6, and would have been read in a monastery or church service of some kind. This particular fragment was recovered from a book binding, which explains these strange and unique cuttings on it. So you can see here you got these little divots in the leaf and these little tiny, what look like flaps, I guess. Those are more than likely would have been used to fold over the boards of the book and then use some kind of adhesive to, of course, bind it to that board and create a very strong and durable book cover. Now, it was not uncommon to use old manuscripts for the binding of books. These manuscripts, when they would get old or they would start to get worn out or maybe outdated or whatever it may be, because the material was made of parchment, a very strong and durable material and a very expensive material, they would recycle it. They would reuse it so that way the hard work that went into it would not go to waste. And so they would take the old manuscripts and use it to rebind a book that would have been printed a few hundred years later even. There's all kinds of date ranges for that because they did it for a very long time. So that's where this particular fragment was recovered from, was some old book. When they were maybe restoring it or they found it. I don't know all the details about where it came from, but it would have been pulled off of some old book, which is a really interesting story and explains that weird shape of the fragment there. The fragment also contains these scribal marks between the lines, which do indicate that this manuscript was used for public readings. So I imagine maybe some kind of notes to the reader, whether that's the Pope or whoever would have been reading the liturgical documents. We don't know exactly what it says, but it is filling in between those main text lines, which brings an extra layer of interest to it and uniqueness. So that's one thing that I really love about this particular manuscript. Now, do we know anything about who wrote this manuscript? No, as far as we are aware, I don't have the details or the specifics about who would have written this manuscript, although it would have been some kind of monk, potentially in an abbey of some kind or in a monastery. Don't know all of the details, but I do know that would have been produced by someone whose job was to produce and copy texts. And so for this liturgical lectionary, that's probably what was used for it. Now, this particular fragment contains two large and fine Romanesque script columns with early features in the common use of what's called the et ligature within the endings of the words. Now, et ligatures are these ampersand-looking initials, these basically squiggly, more intricate initials that would have been used as maybe a heading or a chapter heading or a certain emphasis or whatever it may be. But there is a couple on here which are really stunning and interesting to look at. Looking at this type of script is, and the font style is the primary way in which manuscripts like this are dated. When you don't have the name of the scribe, you don't have the location that's specified on this particular fragment, when you don't know much about it, the main and really one of the only ways you have to date these manuscripts is by looking at the type of handwriting, the script that would have been used. And so because of that, that's how this can be dated specifically to that 11th century, pushing into the 12th century a little bit. Now, as far as where it was printed, because we're looking at the font and the type of material that's being used and the style of writing, it's believed that the manuscript has Germanic history to it, that it came basically from Germany, which is really cool. Not a lot of manuscripts that I have in my collection were produced in Germany. I have several manuscripts, specifically not Bible leaves, but manuscripts that are from Germany, but that's not all of them. So it really is an awesome piece to have in my collection. Now, as far as the materials that were used for this, I touched on a little bit earlier. This would be parchment, which of course is animal skin, really thick and fine paper that would have been used, which explains again why they would use this material for rebinding books, because it is very strong and lasts for a very, very long time. Here this one is right around 1,000 years old, which makes it really unique and stand out. Now, how and where did I get this particular manuscript? I got this fragment from a seller in the UK. His name is Stephen Butler. He runs Stephen Butler Rare Books and Manuscripts. It's an amazing website. He's got a lot of great information about the manuscripts that he sells. He's got a really good inventory. I've gotten several items from him. Really love working with him. Highly, highly recommend it. He has these awesome catalogs that are very detailed and goes through all the items that he's selling. Now, I paid for this, I guess, small-ish fragment. I paid $825 for this fragment. Now, I know that's a lot of money, but for something of this age and this rarity, it's a very, very fair price. Manuscripts from this time period are extremely expensive and very rare and difficult to find. When I look for items to add in my collection, one of my niches, one of those things that I really look for is age. I love the older you can get, the better. That's one of the main things that I look for. And so when I got this, when I saw this, I had to have it. Absolutely loved it. That's a really, really good price for something like this. If you were to go online and try and find a manuscript like this for sale, you'd have an extremely difficult time doing it. You can't just Google 11th century Bible fragment for sale. I do it all the time, and I seldom see one come on the market. So when I saw this, I jumped on it. Absolutely love having it in my collection, and is one of my prized possessions. Now, if I were to try and buy a full Bible, if you were wanting to buy a full lectionary from the 11th century, how much would that set you back? It's really hard to put a price on what that Bible would be. I did some research, tried to find other sales that may have taken place from a lectionary or some liturgical book that would have been produced in that time, or a Bible, anything close to that. And I wasn't able to find any complete books that were for sale. It just goes to show how rare they are and how hard they are to find. But The individual leaves do have a very wide range of price. You can look anywhere from your average full leaf to be probably in that $2,000 range, all the way up to $20,000. All of that, of course, is contingent on the condition of the manuscript. You can see here this condition is not excellent because it is torn up. Even though the script is very clear and visible, it is not in the best shape. You're looking at the province. If you know who it was produced by, where it came from, whose hands it's been in from the time it was produced to the present, that's going to really increase the value. Are there illuminations or illustrations on this manuscript? That drastically, really increases the value of a manuscript. And then, of course, any historical significance, anything that is tied to this particular leaf, if it's tied to some historical figure in time, in history, or a specific place in time that had a historical significant thing happen, that is going to add a lot of value. So there's a lot of things that come into play when you're looking at the value of these things, which is why there's such a wide range of them. Based on that, based on the leaves potentially being upwards to $20,000, you could be looking in the, I would probably say, the millions, hundreds of thousands to millions. Just very rare, very hard to come by. Like I said, I've seen individual manuscripts go at auction for around $20,000. So who knows what it could fetch. So I really do appreciate you coming in and watching this video, sticking it out to the end. Of course, make sure you stick around for those close-up shots of this fragment. You'll be able to see it in a lot more detail and a lot closer up. And then please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and sharing it with anyone who you think would find it interesting. So thank you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next one.